Alright, so today we're going to get started with creative landscapes with all of the new filters inside Photo RAW 2020. So basically we're going to take a bunch of different landscape photos and I'm going to show you guys how you can use all of the new filters. So we're going to start with this photograph here. So I'm just inside of Browse, inside of Photo RAW 2020, and I'm going to head into the Edit module. So I'm just going to hit D on my keyboard and that's going to take me right into the Develop tab. Alright, and I'm just going to hide this preset panel right here. If you guys are new to using Photo RAW 2020, we do have a dedicated preset panel right here, and we actually updated all of our presets. So these are all new preset catalogs and presets, except for the ones that I have added in here. But the ones with pictures are all new presets that you guys can use. So I'll just close that here. And alright, so this photograph here, the first thing I want to do to this photo before we start actually applying different filters is I'm going to head over to my tone and color pane, and I'm going to use this AI Auto feature. So I'm just going to click AI Auto. And so what's the AI Auto feature doing is it's actually going to go in and automatically develop the tone and color for me on my image. And the cool thing about this is I can actually modify the amount. So if I don't like how strong it is, I can pull back and it will modify those sliders. So I like what that does to the photograph if I hit the backslash key on my keyboard. It's basically brought in some contrast and a little bit of color. Well, I'm going to head down to my exposure here, and I'm just going to pull it back just a little bit, probably about right there. So now we've just set the basic tone and color for our photo. So now we can head into Effects, and this is where we can start actually playing with all of the new filters. So we'll add a filter, and the 4 new filters to Photo RAW 2020 are our Channel Mixer, our Color Balance filter, Sun Flare, and the Weather filter. So the first thing we're going to talk about is the Channel Mixer filter, because it's a little bit more of a niche filter, if you will. So we're going to grab the Channel Mixer filter here. And the Channel Mixer filter is pretty specific to certain types of photography and aspects of what you're shooting. But the great thing about the Channel Mixer is that it's awesome for converting your image to black and white. And it's also awesome for bringing in a bunch of creative color. So with a photo like this, where there's not a huge color palette, I mean, we have some differentiating tones, but not a bunch. One thing I like to do with photographs like this is I'll convert them to a black and white. Well, the Channel Mixer is a really easy way to convert your photos to a black and white. So if I head over to my Channel Mixer here, I can go to my More Preset Styles, and the first 4 are going to be black and white styles. So if I hover over these, this first one is a black and white blue filter. We have green, infrared, and then red filter. And then we have all of these other ones down here. So we have all these false color ones. These will get a little crazy, and we'll talk more about these later on in this video. But for now, let's just focus on these top 4 right here. And I'm actually going to add this black and white infrared. And I know it looks a little crazy now, but what a black and white infrared is going to do is if you have a bright sunny sky, like a blue sky in your photograph, it's going to add in a bunch of dark contrast to that sky, and then it's going to take your greens in your photo, and it's going to bring them out with a kind of bright white color. So if I turn this off and on here, you can see it's taking the greens in my image and it's brightening them up. So you can see in the foreground, I have this grassy foliage area and it's just brightening that up. So if I turn this off and on, it does an awesome job of converting it to that black and white infrared. Well, the cool thing about Photo RAW 2020 is we can always add on new filters to stylize. So this black and white infrared is pretty bright. So what I can do is I'm going to add a filter, and I'm going to add my curves filter. And I'm just going to pull this down below my Channel Mixer. And so now in my curves filter, I'm going to go into these 3 areas here, my red channel, my green channel, and my blue channel. And I'm going to start with my blue channel. So I'll go to my blue channel, my curves, and now that I have this Channel Mixer above my curves filter, I can modify the color tones to modify my exposure. So in here, like I was saying, with an infrared Channel Mixer filter applied, it's going to take the blues in your photo and it's going to bring in a lot of dark contrast to them. So if I go in here and I grab my blues, these are like my blue tones in my tone curve right here. So if I go in here to my blue tones, I'm going to go into my midtones right here, which is the middle area on this tone curve. And now if I pull up on it, you can see it's darkening my image. Well, that's because I have that Channel Mixer filter right above it. So if I bring in more blues, then it's darkening the image. Well, now if I go into my reds, if I play with my reds, it's going to brighten the photograph. So I can take my blues and my reds and I can sit here and kind of play with them to get the look I want on my photo and just modify those specific tones. So with this blue tone curve area, I was just modifying my specific midtones. Well, my red, I'm going to put a little dot right here. So I'm going to place a handle right there. And then I'm going to go into my shadow tones. And now I can modify my shadow tones and I can add in a little bit of contrast to them by just pulling down on this red area strictly in the shadow tone curve. I know that's kind of confusing, but if you just think about it like your tone curve, but this is strictly modifying the red colors, it's a lot easier to think about. So now if I turn this tone curve off and on, see how much that's modified this channel mixer filter? So even though the channel mixer filter is a pretty specific filter to a lot of photographers out there that are shooting infrared photography, it's actually a really good filter to convert your photos to black and white. And I can always go in and I can modify, any of these red or blue channels to get all of the color tones that I want on this photo. So I could bring in that dramatic, kind of blown out sky, or I could make it a lot more dim, or I could go into my blues and modify those. And then also, if you just want to convert it to black and white and not modify too much, you can always just go in here and choose like your blue filter or something. And this looks really awesome as a black and white, just like that. Or with this channel mixer, you could also use it to bring out the different colors in your photo. So if I go in here, I can go to these more styles. And if I go to this vivid blue, so now if I turn this off and on here, it's really bringing out all of the blue colors in my sky area. Well, I don't like it in this foreground, so what I can do is I can mask the top area, or rather I can mask the bottom area by just grabbing my masking bug. I'll hit M on my keyboard. So now, oops, am I in Photo RAW? My keyboard got disconnected, sorry guys. There we go. M. Masking bug, right? Huh. Oh, I'm so sorry guys. I didn't even have the filter selected. So make sure you have a filter selected if you're trying to grab your masking bug. And then I'll hit M on my keyboard, that'll grab me my masking bug. And then I can go up to my presets and I can choose linear bottom so that it's applied to the top. And then I can just drop this down. Then I'll feather it quite a bit. And now if I turn this off and on, it brings a lot of that blue color into the sky. And you can use it with the vivid blue, the vivid green. There's a bunch of different ones in here. I'll reset this mask. But a lot of these vivid colors, you can really use them to help out the colors in your photo, especially with this red. So if I turn this red off and on, see how much red it brings into these buildings? And I can always go in and I could just mask that out from the areas that I don't want it. So that's the channel mixer filter, and that's just one landscape scenario that you could apply the channel mixer filter to. Like I was saying earlier, really great for black and whites and black and white infrared shots. We'll remove that one, and then we'll add another filter, and another one of the new filters is this color balance filter. So this color balance filter is going to allow you to modify the different color tones within your shadows, your highlights, and your midtones. So with the color balance filter, I typically go into my shadow tones first. So what I'm going to do with this photograph is I'm actually going to make my shadows a little bit more red to bring out some of that red color in these buildings here. So I'm going to click on shadows, and the first thing I do is I head down to my amount. So by pulling up on my amount, it's going to bring in some of that red color. So this is basically your saturation amount. And then my hue up here is going to control the color. So it's already over here on the left, so it's giving me that red color anyway. So you can see by turning that off and on, it's bringing in some of that rich red into these shadowy tones on the photograph. Well, I'm just going to pull it back a hair, probably about 50. And then I'm going to pull back my brightness. And that's going to add in some contrast. So you can see that by pulling back that brightness, it's just bringing in a little bit more contrast to these darker areas. So that's just with the shadow tab modified. And it's just modified those shadowy tones to bring out a little bit more of that red color. And then we have midtones, so we can modify our midtones. Basically, the color balance filter is just like your split tone filter, except for now you can modify your midtones. So now in my midtones, I'm going to pull up on my amount again. That's just going to give me kind of a glimpse of what I'm doing. And then the majority of the midtones in this photo are in the sky. So a lot of these grays back here, let me just show you. So if I pull up on the brightness, if I modify the brightness, you can see that the areas that are being modified the most with this midtone slider are the areas of gray in that sky. So what I can do with these midtones is I'm going to bring them up a little bit like that. Make sure my amount's up so I can bring in some color. And then I'm going to pull my hue over to blue. And that's going to bring in a blue color to the midtones in the shot. Maybe make it a little less blue. Maybe make it like an aqua color. But there we go. I like how that's going so far. So now what we can do is we'll go into our highlights and we'll do the same thing. I'm going to head down to my amount, pull up on that a little bit. And then for my hue, for this, most of the highlights in here are going to be this bright area of clouds right here and then the roof on these buildings. So the roof on this building has kind of a rusty color to it, so we'll just bring in some of that with this hue. We'll go to like a gold orange color, modify the amount a little bit. And then again, we'll play with the brightness, so we'll just pull that up like that. So now if I hit the \K on my keyboard, or not \K on my keyboard, if I turn this color balance filter off and on, see how much that does to just make this photo a little bit more epic? It brings in some contrast into the buildings, it brings back that nice red color that was there, and then it also brightens up the sky. So the color balance filter is awesome for modifying all of the specific tones and colors within your highlights, shadows, and midtones, and you can really use it to correct the color in your landscapes. Okay, so now we've talked about the channel mixer filter, the color balance filter, and then there's the sunflower filter, which I don't think the sunflower filter would work too great on this photo, but one filter that we could use on this shot is the weather filter. So let's add this weather filter. And so the weather filter is going to bring realistic weather overlays onto your photo. So inside of the weather filter, the first thing I'm going to do is I can choose one of these presets, but I feel like these are a little bit too strong for this photo. So I'm going to go in here to texture, and I'm just going to choose, yeah, we'll just choose accumulation. This looks pretty good like that. And one thing I like doing if I'm adding on a weather overlay is I tend to bring in a black and white. So I'm going to add a filter, and I'm going to add that channel mixer filter, and I'm going to go into this preset styles, and I'm going to use this black and white blue filter. So now if I turn this off and on, I really like how that black and white kind of melds a lot better with the snow look. And we can go into this weather, and I'm going to pull up the opacity down here just so it's at 100, but then I can always lower the opacity for that filter, maybe about right there. So now if I turn off this weather filter, it makes it seem like it was a snowy day in front of these buildings. Well, whenever we add on the weather filter, I tend to go in and I add a filter and I add the curves filter. Something to me about adding these weather overlays, it just makes the image look a little flat. So a way that you can make it look less flat is you can go into your curves filter here. I'm going to head down to the bottom left. This is my black point on my tone curve. I'm going to pull up on that and then pull it to the right. That's going to bring in some contrast and sort of a faded matte look, which I really like with these weather overlays. I think it brings in sort of a vintagey film look. And then I'm going to pull down on my shadow tones a little bit, just like that. And then I'm going to take this area right here, this is my midtones, and I'm just going to pull up on it a little bit. So now if I turn this tone curve off and on, it just brings in a little bit of contrast and a little bit of that faded matte look just to help out this photo a little bit. And I think the last thing we could do with this weather filter is we could just add a vignette. So now if I hit the \K on my keyboard, I really like what that's doing to this photo. I think the weather filter works good right there, and the black and white really helps the snowflakes stand out in the shot. Yeah, I'm not really sure why I like the black and white with the weather overlays, but I think they work really well together. And then the curves filter obviously does a good job of just bringing in some contrast. All right, so that's the first landscape scenario. We'll move on to the next one here. All right, so with this photograph, first thing again is I'm gonna head into my Develop tab, and I just love using this AI Auto. It just helps so much with time and trying to figure out the best exposure. All I have to do is head over to AI Auto, click it. It's automatically developed my tone and color, and then I can modify this amount to cater it to my photo. So I typically like a little bit more of an underexposed shot. So I typically make it, you know, not as bright as the usual AI Auto, maybe about 50 or 60, but I think that looks pretty good. Maybe a little more. Perfect. So now we'll head into Effects. We'll add a filter, and we'll add that first filter, that channel mixer filter. And this is where we can actually start getting a little wonky with the colors. So I'll add that channel mixer filter. And this photo would look okay with a black and white infrared. So watch as I click black and white infrared. It's a pretty photo. I think everything looks great in black and white, but I don't think it looks as great as the last one did in black and white. So let's add a little color onto the shot. So I'm gonna reset this filter. I'm gonna go into these more presets, and I'm gonna choose this false color 2. So already, if I turn this off and on, I think it does an awesome job of bringing in like a little flare to these palm trees, and then a ton of nice tonal blue into the sky and then the water. And the cool thing about the channel mixer filter, or any filter in Photo RAW, is I can always go up to my opacity and I can lower it. So I usually just lower it to 0, and then I can just incrementally pull it up. So even just then, even just at about 50%, the channel mixer filter with that kind of wild false color really brings in some cool creative flair to the shot. And then you could always use one of the preset styles for vivid color. So if I wanted to bring in more green to the palm trees, I could go in here, click vivid green. Now my palm trees are incredibly green. And then what I could do is I could actually hit B on my keyboard. Actually, we could actually do a color range mask. So let's go in here. Go to my masking options. I'll click this color range, and then I'll click it on these greens. So now if we view this, oops, I gotta change my mask view. Oops, I want red overlay. So now if we view this, you can see that the palm trees are the ones getting most of that. So I can just pull it down here, about right there. And now if we turn it off and on, it's strictly applied to those green areas. So the channel mixer filter, I know I keep saying it, but even though it's a pretty specific filter to swapping infrareds and creating black and white shots, it's a really, really awesome filter for bringing in vivid, bright color, and also just bringing in kind of creative styles to your shot. So that's a channel mixer filter on a particular photo like this. Let's go back into that. Actually, one thing I was going to show you is the vivid blue again. So if you have a sky area and you want to bring in more blue, you could always just click vivid blue, and then I'll hit M on my keyboard. That's going to grab me my masking bug. I can drop this down. I'll feather it and lower the opacity quite a bit. And now if I turn this off and on, it's already brought in a ton of nice blue color to the sky just by using that channel mixer filter. So a really multi-purpose filter in a way. You can use it for a ton of different things, and it's really great for black and whites. So we'll add another filter, and we'll go down to our color balance filter. So the color balance filter, again, is just modifying the different color tones in our shadows, our midtones, and our highlights. So usually start with shadows. And for a photo like this, where there's typically a little bit of a blue tint in the water from the sky, is I'm just going to go into my shadows, I'll pull up on my amount, and I'll bring it to a nice blue. About right there, maybe a little less blue. And then I'll pull down on the brightness. And that's going to bring in some contrast. And maybe a little less blue. Perfect. So now we'll go into our midtones. And the midtones in this photo are going to be those these grays kind of in between our highlights and our shadows. So this area in our photo, these areas are all going to be midtones. So now if I modify my midtones, you can see it's modifying these light grays. So I'm going to go to my amount, pull that up, and I'm going to make those blue as well. Blue about right there. A lot less blue, maybe like that. Maybe a little more. Okay, so now that we've made our midtones and our shadows blue, we got to go into our highlights and we got to counterbalance. So we're going to go into our highlights. We'll pull up on the amount again, and then we'll bring them to a nice sort of gold color. And then I'm going to pull up on the brightness of those all the way. So now if I turn this off and on, see how much we've done for that photo in just one filter? So it really allows you to play with all of the different color tones in your photograph, and you can bring in some awesome creative color with the color balance filter. So I think for this photo, I probably wouldn't recommend adding a sun flare or a weather filter, so we'll just move on to the next shot here. We'll grab this photo. All right, so I'll go into develop, and same thing, I'm gonna click AI Auto, because I love AI Auto, and then we'll just pull back. I don't want it that intense. Maybe about there. So then we're going to we're gonna go into effects. I'm gonna add a filter, and we're gonna skip channel mixer and color balance for this one. Actually, let's just see channel mixer. Channel mixer, I actually really love channel mixer the more that I'm playing with it, and I always check to see how they look in black and white infrareds. So it's not bad. I mean, it's okay. See, some of these false colors would be a lot better, even false color 1. I think that looks super cool. Let's just leave it at that. We'll leave it at false color 1. Okay, so now that we have our channel mixer used on this photograph, we'll add another filter. And I'm not going to use color balance, and I'm not going to use the weather filter on this photo, but I am going to use the sun flare filter. So we'll add a sun flare. And we don't want a flare on this photo because our sun is obviously down here. If we had a flare up here, it would look really weird. So we need to bring the sun in here somehow. So we're going to go into our type, and we're going to choose sun star. And in sun star, we're going to go down, and we're going to choose a different sun star. And I'm going to choose this 15. So now with the sun star, I'm going to click on this little icon right here, and that's going to allow me to move this around. So I'm just going to move this down right into that area right there. I'm trying to emulate just the sun peeking through here and bringing a bunch of light in. So I think that looks pretty good just like that. So now inside the sun flare filter, we can actually modify a lot of the different tones for our sun flare. So I'm going to pull up on the amount, so that's at 100, and then I'm going to pull down on the brightness a little bit, right about there. I'll pull up on the saturation, and I'm going to bring my hue down to a warmer color, about like that. And then I'm going to go down to the sunshine filter, and so our sunshine is built right into your sun flare filter, so you don't have to go back and add a filter and then modify a sunshine filter. We can do it right inside of our sun flare. So I'm going to pull up on this sunshine just a little bit, and then I'm going to bring in some warmth, just like that. So now if I turn this off and on, it does a good job of just having the sun peek right through there. Well, one thing I'm going to do is I'm going to lower the opacity just a little bit, about like right there. I'll just leave it at 100. And then I'm going to go into my local adjustments. And one thing I need to do is I need to match this sun flare look in a larger scale. So this doesn't look very realistic with just this bright light right here. It almost looks like a car headlight is right there. So what I can do to make it look like the sun is I need to brighten up the area around the sun, if that makes sense. So what I'm going to do that is I'm going to go into my local adjustments. I'm going to click on lighten. I'm going to make my brush size incredibly large. And then I'm just going to brush just like that. Then we'll go over to our opacity, We'll lower the opacity quite a bit, and then we'll incrementally kind of bring it up. And then I'll make it look like the sun is there rather than just someone holding a flashlight. So now we can go into effects, and I think this looks pretty good as far as just bringing in a sun flare. Now I can add a filter, and let's just stylize with a LUT filter. Just make it really easy. We'll just use one of these color grading ones. Actually, I kind of like that. Lower the opacity a little bit. So now if we hit the backslash key on our keyboard, just an easy way to bring a little bit more oomph into your photo. So if you're looking at a horizon line or you're shooting at a horizon line and you've got some sun in the background, it's a pretty easy effect to bring into your photograph. So I think that's the only filter I chose for this shot. We can move on to another photo. But I feel bad because the sunflower filter is a really cool tool, especially on landscapes. Grab this photograph. Are there any questions before I move on to this next photo? All right, so let's start with this photograph here. And I don't know if you guys are thinking the same thing, but if you can see the top of this photo right here, this is going to be a prime photo for the weather filter. So I'm going to go into my Develop tab first, and I'm going to click AI Auto just to develop the basic tonality for my scene. Then I'll go into Effects, I'll add a filter, and let's start. So we'll start with the channel mixer filter. We'll start with the channel mixer and we'll move down the line, except for sunflare. We're not going to use sunflare on this photo. So I grab my channel mixer, and I go into these more styles. Black and whites are going to look really good in photos like this. So if I go into my black and whites, especially infrared, and the reason being is that with infrared photography, your foreground area when it's foliage or it's green is going to brighten up. Well, if you have a person in your foreground, for example, this guy, he really stands out because he's probably wearing something blue colored or dark, and so he's going to be dark in this image where the foreground is going to be all nice and bright with those white colors, and it makes him stand out quite a bit. Or you could use any of these other ones. Some of these false colors are really cool. I really like this one right here, this false color too. And then I could bring this down. And then it just kind of changes up where he's at. I mean, honestly. Or vivid blue or vivid green, so if you wanted more greens on your photo, I mean, you can see how much it brightens up those greens in there. So the channel mixer filter, really, really awesome tool for modifying the colors and just bringing in some cool creative looks to your shot. And we'll just do, No, we'll just close out of here. And let's actually add just a black and white, and I'll add the red. Okay, so now we've converted this image to black and white. I'm going to add another filter, and I'm going to add this weather filter. So with the weather filter, again, just go in and choose your texture. You can use the presets. I'm going to go into the texture here, and I'll just see how these look. I kind of like this one. I'm going to leave that one. And then I'll pull up on the opacity to 100, because I can always modify the opacity up here. And then I'm going to go down to my fog right here. So up at the top of this photo, I can see that there's a lot of fog coming over this mountain. So I'm going to go to my fog, and my position, I'm going to choose top half fast. So that's applied to the top half of this photo. Now I can go down into my fog. I'll pull up on the amount. And see how that brings in a bunch of fog right there? Well, I can always go down here, and in my distance, rotation, and transition, I can modify the blending of it. So the transition is going to feather that edge, and then rotation is obviously going to rotate, and then distance is going to be the distance from the top to the bottom. So I think this looks pretty good just like that. If I turn this off and on, maybe a little too strong. How about like that? So now we'll add a filter, and you may know what I'm going to. I'm going to the curves filter. So whenever I add this weather filter, I typically do it with a black and white. I'm not really sure why. I think they look really cool in black and whites. But with the curves filter, you can bring in some of that contrast that you're losing by bringing in some of that fog or this weather overlay. So I'm going to go down to my black point here. This bottom left of my tone curve is my black point. And then I'll just pull up to the right. See how that's bringing in some nice contrast? And then I can bring in more with the shadow point. And then again, I'm just going to grab my midtones, and then I'll pull up on those a little bit more. So now if I turn this off and on, does a really good job of just bringing in some more contrast to this photograph. So now if we hit the backslash key on our keyboard, just kind of really changing the whole perspective on this photograph by using these different filters. And then we could probably add a filter. Vignettes look really good in these too, and usually just use Big Softy, and then you could bring your vignette down to here. And so now it's only applied around him. So the weather filter, really great filter, but I would recommend using it on photos with, an overcasty look, things with fog, scenes with actual snow in them work great for the weather filter. I would just avoid putting it on something with a sunny day or something like that. It can really look a little wonky. Okay, so we'll move on. That's another way to use the weather filter. So we'll move on to this photograph here. All right, so with this photo, I'm going to go into Develop, and same thing, I'm just going to click AI Auto. Just going to bring in some contrast. Hit the backslash key on my keyboard. Nice tone and color now. We can head into Effects, add a filter, and we're going to add the channel mixer filter. So with the channel mixer filter, again, I'm going to go into my presets, and I'm going to choose this false color 2. Because if I turn this off and on, look at all this cotton candy awesome color it brings into the sky and the water. And we can always lower the opacity. So we can just lower the opacity quite a bit so that's not so intense. But right, does an awesome job of bringing some color back into the clouds and the sky. So now that we've brought in some color with this channel mixer filter using our false color, I'm going to add another filter, and I'll add this color balance filter. So now I've brought in a bunch of false color with that channel mixer. Now I can actually modify the original color tones with this color balance filter. So I'll go into my shadows, and the majority of shadows on this photograph are in the water. So I'm going to pull up on my amount to about 50, and then I'll pull up on my hue to a blue color. Sort of a kind of an aqua color, maybe like that. Perfect. And then the midtones are going to be some of these middle grays in here. So we'll make those kind of warm. Just like that. And then we'll brighten those up. Then highlights. We're going to go down to our mount again. We'll pull that up. And I actually kind of like, well, I like that orange right there. I like that. So we're going to leave that. I'll pull back on the amount so it's not so crazy, and then we'll pull up on the brightness a little bit. Okay, so now if I turn this color balance filter off and on, see how that does an awesome job of bringing out all of these tones in there and then just brightening up the areas that we want to stay nice and well exposed. So really awesome filter. I love the color balance filter, and I really love the channel mixer filter the more that I use it. Okay, so if I hit the backslash key on my keyboard, we're definitely on the right track in this photo. I think one more thing we could add, or maybe a couple more things, but we'll add a filter, and we'll add the sun flare filter. And we'll go into our sun stars again, and we'll choose this filter, this Sunstar 17. So I'm going to go to my amount. I'm going to turn that up to 100. Then again, I'm going to grab this little positioning tool, and I can drag this around. I'm going to drag it kind of right above. Oops. Click that again. I'm just going to drag it kind of right above this wave right there. Perfect. So now I'm going to go into my tone and color, and I'm going to pull back on the brightness just a little bit. I'm going to pull up on my saturation to bring in some of that warm color. And then I'm going to shift the hue. Oops. To kind of a, well, I'll just leave it how it is. I think it looks pretty good like that. And then again, with this sunflower filter, we can always bring in the sunshine filter as well. So I'm going to go down here. I'll pull up on this sunshine a little bit. Bring in a little bit more warmth, some saturation, and we'll leave the fade how it is. So if I turn the sunflower filter off and on, I really like what that does to the shot. And then we could probably do one last thing. I'll add a filter. Or actually, rather, let's add a local adjustment. And we'll create a nice little vignette using our local adjustment. So I'm going to click darken. I'm going to hold down shift and hit K on my keyboard. And then I'm going to head up to my shape, and I'm going to choose center. And what this is going to do is it's going to protect everything in the center of my mask. So if I click, this darken local adjustment layer is applied outside of this mask, and then the inside of it is nice and protected. So I'm just going to bring this in around this little sunflower filter, kind of in the middle. And then I'm just going to feather the crap out of this vignette. So now if I turn this off and on, it just acts as a nice little subtle vignette for this photo. So \K on our keyboard. I really like what that does to the shot. And one last thing we could probably bring in, I could add a filter. And I don't know if you guys have noticed, but I'm a huge fan of the tone curve. And we could bring in just a little bit more tonal contrast and mood onto the shot. Sweet. So now let's hit the \K on our keyboard. And voila. Sorry, so that's with using our channel mixer, our color balance, and our sunflower filter. And a curves filter, and then a local adjustment. But you get the idea. They're really, really awesome filters to use, and they can make your landscapes look amazing. All right, so I think that's the last photo. We may have one more here. We'll do one more. And then let me know if you guys have any questions. I know we're kind of cruising through here, but I just want to get you guys up to speed on these filters so you can start using them on your shots. All right, so for this photo, again, I'm going to go down to AI Auto. Just so easy. And then I'm going to probably pull back on the exposure a little bit. And then maybe pull up on the midtones. Okay, so we'll now go into effects. We'll add a filter, and we're going to add the channel mixer filter. And the reason I'm adding the channel mixer filter is because this photo, not that it's a bland photo or it's boring, but it's just kind of there. There's not much going on to it. There's a bridge, and then there's a bunch of foliage. Well, with a photo like this, it's going to look awesome in a black and white. So I'll go into my channel mixer, go to more, and I'll choose this black and white blue filter. See how that brings in a lot of dark contrast into the greens in this photo? It looks really good on this shot. So now I'm going to add another filter, and I'll add the weather filter. I'll go into textures, and I'll choose, let's choose blizzard. Let's make it look like it's blizzarding. So I'll pull up on the opacity a little bit, and then I'm going to go down to my fog. It's at top half slow, so that's perfect. I can just pull up on this a little bit. That's going to bring in some of that fog. And then we can lower the opacity just a hair, like that. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit B on my keyboard. That's going to grab me my masking brush. And I'm going to go up to my masking brush options, and I'm going to lower the opacity to about 20. Make my brush size quite small. And then I'm just going to brush some of this filter off of this bridge. I really want this bridge to kind of be the subject in this photo, so I'm just removing some of these snowflakes from it. Just like that. So now it's mainly just applied to the other areas. So now we'll add another filter, and I'll add my curves filter. And again, we're just going to go down to our black point, pull up and to the left. That's going to bring some nice mood into this shot. I'll pull back on this. That's going to bring in some contrast. Then we can incorporate a little bit more midtones like that. So that does a good job like that. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back into my local adjustments, and we're going to do the same thing we did with that last photo, except we're going to use the lighten local adjustment. So I'll click lighten, I'll hold down shift, hit K on my keyboard, and then I'm going to go up to edges. And the reason I want edges is because now inside the mask is where this local adjustment is going to be applied, and then everywhere outside is going to be protected. So I want to go in and bring some light onto this bridge right here. So I'll just drop this local adjustment down. I'll make it incredibly small, kind of fit the size of the bridge a little bit more, just like that. And then I'm going to pull out on the feathering like that. Then I can lower the opacity for this. And we may need to bring some of that weather back. There we go. And then let's add one last thing, and I'll add a vignette, and I'll click Big Softy. Okay, so now if we hit the backslash key on our keyboard, totally different image than when we started. And we use the channel mixer, the weather filter, our curves, of course, and then the vignette and a local adjustment, but not too many things, and we didn't really do it in that much time. So all right guys, well that's all I have for you today. Is there any questions before I head out? I really appreciate you guys all signing up. Thanks so much. I hope you guys learned a little bit more about the new filters inside Photo RAW 2020 and how you can use them on your landscapes. Don't be afraid of the channel mixer. Also, it's a really, really awesome filter, and great for black and whites.